Right. Well, I too very much enjoyed your thought-provoking paper setting up the whole theme. I shouldn't start with an apology, but I will. I'm sorry to come back again to Brexit. But I do hope to say one or two new things about it. Others, of course, have said a huge amount about sovereignty conflicts that are inherent in Brexit between sovereignty and constitutional protections of rights, between the sovereignty of the people and the sovereignty of the Parliament of the UK versus the sovereignty of the peoples and parliaments of the UK, between different forms of sovereignty, popular and parliamentary, that fight it out for the soul of Brexit itself. Okay, all of those things have been talked about at huge length, and I'm not going to try and add much to them. I really want to try to raise two other themes. First, I want to ask, has Brexit raised expectations of taking back control that are likely to constrain forms of sovereignty pooling that the UK might well need to meet its own obligations to its own public to secure rights, justice, and standards of democracy? I want second to ask, how far are internal sovereignty conflicts created by Brexit manageable through the normal democratic procedures of the UK's political system? An agreed democratic process should, in principle, be able to settle even the most acute of sovereignty conflicts. Even sovereignty conflicts perhaps do not need to be explosive on their own, but only in conjunction with a political system that can't handle them. So, on the first point about the need to pool sovereignty if a state like the UK is to meet its own obligations to its own publics to secure rights, justice, and democracy, I start by observing just how much of a mistake it is to see managing externalities between democracies, to see the provision of collective goods and managing externalities between democracies as a kind of problem of utility, as something that's just instrumental. Just a matter, as Hume put it, of doing useful things like building bridges and building lighthouses. No, managing externalities between democracies is something that democracies need to do if they're going to meet their own most fundamental obligations to their publics to provide rights, justice, and democracy. Democracies may struggle to provide their publics with rights against polluters, monopolists, tax evaders, terrorists, traffickers, discriminators, slanderers, spreaders of hate. If democracies can't cope with those things when they originate in other states, in other democracies, when those things are the result of arbitrary domination located in other states, located in other democracies. Those interstate externalities will then affect how well institutions, laws, life chances all fit together in Rawls's terms to provide a fair scheme of cooperation. So how well democracies manage externalities between themselves will shape how well each of those democracies is able to make sure that its own structure of life chances, of laws and institutions all fit together to form a more or less fair or more or less just society. If finally, it is an ideal of democracy that citizens should be able to define the terms of their own living together as equals. Democracies may need means of managing externalities between themselves if their citizens are to have any chance of influencing matters as vital to the terms of their living together as protection against pandemics, as providing security against arms racing, as providing financial systems free of risk, free of systemic risk, as, of course, fighting climate change. These are all obvious externalities that democracies will need to manage between themselves if their own publics are going to have any chance of determining the kind of collective terms of their living together as equals. Now, the most obvious question that follows from all of this, discussed in the paper, is how far managing interstate externalities, how far does managing inter-democracy externalities require forms of self-binding, self-limitation, shared lawmaking of a kind that have been ruled out by Brexit? How far has Brexit created expectations of regaining national sovereign control that are not likely to be compatible with the needs for international cooperation and the use of shared lawmaking to provide international cooperation in ways that are then going to manage externalities? Yet, to move on to the second theme, how far the UK's political system can handle all of this, the paper identifies parliamentary elections as the main procedure, which the UK is now going to have to rely on to resolve all of the unresolved sovereignty conflicts in Brexit. Now, in a way, apologies again, this is just so old hat. The problems of the British electoral system are just so familiar that I really hesitate to go over them all over again. And yet, in some ways, the full extent of the problem is just so surprising that it is worth, I think, it is worth our while to bring this problem up once again in the context of managing externalities, handling sovereignty pooling and all of the rest of it after Brexit. Now, the UK famously has a winner-takes-all electoral system. A single winning party usually gets to control both government and parliament for up to 5 years at a time. Although often described as majoritarian, a majority is actually one thing that almost all British governments do not have. So maybe the UK system at least confers a monopoly of power on the party with the largest number of votes. Not even that can be taken for granted. The party that comes first in the votes, as lots and lots of people know, the party that comes first in the votes can come second in the representation. Nor is there any one clear singular relationship between the total number of votes and the total representation. There's no single relationship between the aggregate of votes and who gets what kind of representation. To its critics then, the system is worse than a system of majority domination. It's a system of plurality domination, established by arbitrary pluralities. Now, many people have asked over the decades, just how can a system that gives one party a monopoly of power for up to 5 years, often with much less than 50% of the vote, just how can that possibly be acceptable to losers as well as winners? All the important answers that used to be given to this question now just seem hopelessly out of date. And again, it's worth going over them again, just to try to think through what all of this means for Brexit. First, the UK used to be thought to be an unusually homogeneous society. Second, it used to be claimed that British politics competed for the centre. It was a classic case of the median voter competing for the centre. British political parties competed for the centre, with the result that even those who voted for losing parties could expect similar policy outcomes from the winning party of government to those of their own preferred political party. Third, Although a state of four nations, territorial cleavages within the UK were largely subsumed. They used to be largely subsumed into a single left-right dimension of political competition. Yet fourth and finally, that single left-right dimension was as weak as it was unifying. Left-right dominated in British politics in the absence of anything much else to argue about. So the UK had a one-dimensional structure of political competition without polarization and without smothering other forms of political choice. How have things changed? In contrast, in Brexit Britain, the UK is a deeply divided society with multi-dimensional cleavages. As well as territorial cleavages, it has two distinct left-right cleavages, one preoccupied with markets, the other with immigration and identity. Yet preferences, sorry, I'm almost finished, yes. Yet preferences for Brexit between varieties of Brexit are salient and toxic along all of those multiple cleavages, on questions of economics, on questions of identity, on questions of territory. That makes it extremely hard. That makes it extremely hard to identify stable and determinate majorities for choices entailed by Brexit, let alone for the resolution of major sovereignty conflicts raised by Brexit. So, in sum, I've argued that some continued pooling of sovereignty will be needed if Brexit UK is to deliver on its own obligations to its own public to secure rights, justice and standards of democracy. I have questioned whether the UK can do that without significant forms of self-binding, shared lawmaking and all of the rest of it that may well clash with expectations of bringing back control over lawmaking. And I've also questioned whether Brexit UK can resolve such sovereignty conflicts, such as those raised by the need for continued sovereignty pooling within the normal democratic procedures of the UK political system itself. Thank you.